welcome to The Download, where we bring you discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today's Wednesday, July 5th, 2023. I'm Brad Eli here with my two co-hosts, Simon Wright and Christine Niles. And joining us today in the four chairs, Kyle Copey. Hi, Kyle.
Hello, Brad.
Yesterday was, of course, the 4th of July. The Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, D.C., Cardinal Wilton Gregory, used the occasion to complain about gun violence and racism. He tweeted yesterday, "Today we rejoice in our national freedom. We must remember the price of freedom. We recall those who have secured it. We must find ways to safeguard this gift. Many people in our nation are not free from hunger, gun violence, racism, or poverty. They long to be free." End quote. Cardinal Gregory is one of the many liberal prelates in the United States who regularly push for gun control, illegal immigration, and LGBT acceptance. So, you know, the freedom was defended really in this country by men with guns, okay? That might be a shocker to him. Patriotic men who are proud of their country, not proud of their sexual orientation necessarily. And they really were not proud of their country in the sense that they're not illegal immigrants, not coming in to break the laws or anything like that. So I think, you know, he's missing a few cues on that whole spiel.
Well, it's interesting, you know, because obviously you're looking at the 4th of July, which is the popularly the day for the signing of the Declaration of Independence. I don't think it actually is. I think it's actually the 3rd and the 5th of July are actually the days when the signatures were put on it. But the 4th is just generally accepted as the day there to do the Declaration of Independence. And obviously the Declaration of Independence is, as you say, Brad, it is a warlike statement. The motivation there for freedom, this was freedom from taxation without representation. That was the whole notion. It was this whole idea of, you know, government by the people, for the people, of the people. That was the thing that precipitated the American Revolution and the foundation of the United States. So to be speaking about this sense of freedom within, and then coming along saying, well, we're free from hunger, gun violence, racism, or poverty, these are not things that the Patriots initially set out to deal with. These are not things. It wasn't a question of saying, well, we want people to be free from gun violence. It was, we want people to be free from unjust taxation without representation. We're not saying that we want people to be free from hunger. We want people to have the freedom to own their own property in order that they can, you know, then work their way to be free from hunger and indeed free from poverty. You know, and obviously with regard to racism at that point, certainly, you know, there's a discussion to be had there. But the uniting quality, even in 1776, the uniting quality of the American experiment was, first and foremost, you are an American. It was not looking at somebody as from a national origin, somebody from the color of their skin, or somebody from you know, a particular religious background or something like that. Certainly, did slavery exist at that time? Absolutely. There's a lot to be discussed and to be said about that. But you know what? The slavery was ended after a bloody civil war. I mean, I think it's not appropriate to consider the 4th of July and the Revolutionary War without considering the Civil War, in which existed to emancipate the slaves. And, of course, things such as the Civil Rights Act in 64 that we discussed the last time we were sitting here.
Yeah, if they talk about taxation without representation, you know, the trillions that are going out with the Build Back Better, climate change, you know, supporting all that, would just flip the wigs on the poor folks that founded the country. If they thought all of that money, you know, you take a poll of most people around, they were like, I don't want to spend trillions on climate change. I don't want to spend trillions on all these other rabbit holes that they're pouring it down these days. And if that's not taxation without representation, I don't really know what is. So.
Yeah. So Wilton Gregory, he's talking about, you know, people being free from all these various things, and that's a good thing. We don't want people to be poor. We don't want people to get shot down in the streets and things like that. But you know, he's joined the sort of cadre of other American bishops in recent months who have called for you know, an end to these things legitimately, but the means to get there are often very skewed. It's, you know, take the gun issue for example. Last month, I believe it was early last month, you had everyone's favorite cardinal, American cardinal, Joseph Tobin of Newark, New Jersey. He had a similar call for an end to gun violence. Okay, all well and good. But what was his solution? Hey, everyone, turn in your guns voluntarily. He literally said this. He wanted people to voluntarily forego their Second Amendment rights and voluntarily turn in their guns. And do we think that's going to work? No, because what conservative, red-blooded American is actually going to hand over your guns to the Biden administration or the particular state that you live in that's run by the Democrats? You're not going to do that. No one's going to do that. There might be a few gun-toting liberals out there, if that's even a thing, who would say, oh, I'm being such a social justice warrior and I'm going to turn in my guns and that's going to help people. It's not going to work because you don't have to worry about law-abiding citizens when it comes to guns. You have to worry about the criminals who for sure are not going to turn in their serial scratched-off guns. They don't even own them legally, and that's the ones that are going to be used to perpetrate these crimes. So the solutions that they're talking about are just, non-existent. They're not going to work.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. Is obviously everybody wants gun violence to be decreased. Every single person here, we want that to be decreased. It's just the way that the USCCB wants to go about it is they politically align themselves more with the Democrat narrative with regard to this, and then they push these Democrat talking points about how to reduce gun violence. Oh yes, well, let's confiscate these guns. We do have a Second Amendment that's written in our Constitution. I mean, if you don't like the Second Amendment, well, then go through lawful means to have that amendment overturned. There are ways to do that if you don't like that. You don't get to go around the Second Amendment in the Constitution and essentially eliminate it through, these other ways instead. And I think that's the main problem that we have with the U.S. bishops is they're promoting these talking points that sound very good on the surface. Everybody wants to eliminate these things, but then they're pushing these methods that are much more aligned with the Democrat Party than with anything else. For instance, with the whole gun violence thing, you were saying that he wants to everyone just turn in their guns, that sort of thing. Well, the fact is, and I own guns, and so you have to go through a very rigorous background check to get guns. It's not like anyone can just off the street without any ID or anything. I mean, literally the FBI has to run a background check on you. That happened when I bought my guns. Mm-hmm. And especially in a situation like myself where I'm a single mother with 4 children, guns are very useful for self-defense. What happens if someone tries to break into my house in the middle of the night? What do I do? Use a knife, on a guy who's 200 pounds? I mean, no, that's not going to work. Exactly. So it can be and the fact is, most guns, when gun violence, in the case of gun violence, the vast majority of guns are used in self-defense. Mm-hmm. It's like 90%. And so these guns are actually being used to save lives. There was the case in Indiana at the mall, believe that was last year, where a mass shooting was prevented because one guy who had an excellent shot was able to take out his gun and he shot the shooter immediately. Otherwise, it would have been a massacre. Absolutely. But he shot him and he saved lives. And those things are not focused on at all in these discussions by the left or by the bishops. It's always, oh yeah, turn in your guns because guns, they're the problem.
Well, I think you look at the overwhelming amount of gun violence that occurs, and certainly there is different classes of gun violence I think that we need to look at. Firstly, obviously you look at accidental discharge and those sort of concerns, which do happen, and people do get injured and even killed by accidental discharge. At which point I would be a firm proponent of gun control at that point, which is like always assume a gun is loaded, never pointed at anything you don't want to destroy, and don't muck around with a gun. I mean, that's
gun control within your home.
Within your home,
as a responsible parent.
Exactly. That's the whole thing. It's like, let's be responsible with the guns. And also, to be perfectly honest with you, you talk about the great responsibility and the great background checks and so forth that are done by the federal government with regard to owning a gun. I think also that the individual who says, I wish to own a gun, handgun, shotgun, long gun, whatever you want to own, there is a responsibility of that person to become responsible and good with a gun. Just the same as you don't just say, okay, well, I've done my number of hours driving and I've done my test, I've taken my written thing, and behold, I'm now a driver and I'm a driver. Okay, you got to make sure that you're a good driver because you're in charge of 2 tons of steel going at 60 miles an hour. And if that hits somebody, you're going to kill them. So you need to be a responsible driver, being aware of that responsibility you have. There's also the question of suicide with guns. A lot of the gun violence that we discuss is suicide. People kill themselves for many reasons. Usually there's depression, mental illness, this sort of stuff. obviously, at that point, certainly we wish to limit the number of people who are committing suicide. We wish to make sure there are nobody really committing suicide. Getting rid of guns doesn't solve that. Mental health treatments, helping people, a greater growth of spirituality and so forth, that helps with regard to that. But then the vast majority of gun violence is happening because of criminals, often gang criminals. These are gang-related engagements. As you say, these are illegal guns, you know, to just make you feel probably horrible, Christine. If you want to get a gun, you don't need to go to the FBI. You just need to go downtown, and a guy will sell you a gun, and he will. That's just a thing. You can just go get an illegal gun if you are an illegal person. You wish to get a gun to do illegal things. That's the point. Saying let's register all the guns, let's have this national registry, let's increase background checks, let's have people hand them in. If you outlaw guns, only outlaws are going to have guns. That's the point. And certainly that is in many ways separate from the discussion of is the Second Amendment a good idea or not. But ultimately, yes, these guns, they're being used in gang violence by people who are themselves lacking spirituality, lacking religion, lacking civic virtue, lacking fathers in many cases. Those are the things that the bishops have competency over. That's what they should be addressing, not hand in your gun.
I 100% agree. I think that we need to address the question of fatherlessness because it is at the root of so much crime. And also the fact is it's the Democrat-controlled, most heavily gun-controlled cities that have the worst gun violence, Chicago being the prime example. I mean, that has the most restrictive gun laws in the entire country, and yet it has the most shootings in the entire country. I mean, it's horrible. I can't even take my children there anymore because people are like, you know, this is happening in broad daylight in the most beautiful parts of Chicago, so don't take your children here. So it's clear that these restrictive gun measures are not working. But to that point about fatherlessness, the vast majority of these people using these guns to kill each other in Chicago are young black men without fathers. They're angry, and that's what happens. And we've already shown this, that fatherlessness, they are the main perpetrators of crime in this country.
I believe you can adjust for everything. So you can adjust for race, you can adjust for poverty, you can adjust for age, you can adjust for sex, and you can adjust for everything on the statistics for violent crime. And the driver for violent crime statistically is fatherlessness. That's the point. And it's just that, you know what, young men, you know, raised without fathers do not grow up to be young men. They stay perpetually boys. And we've all known boys. You know, we've heard the phrase boys will be boys, and they'll go out and they'll, you know, they go and climb a tree and they kick each other and they violent and so forth. And you know, we all did that. All of us here who were guys, you know, maybe got together and we tussled and we were violent and so forth when we were young. Still do. But our fathers came along and said, okay, that's not how you solve problems. This is not okay. And we learned that. Absent the father, what do you learn? You learn that violence solves problems, you know, and that's the lesson that you learn absent a father. And
also the reason I say black is not because I'm racist, obviously, but because the incidence of fatherlessness is the highest in the black community. It's 77% of children grow up in fatherless homes in black communities. Hispanic communities are the next. It's 50% in Hispanic, and white communities, it's 25%. But those numbers are going up, like way up all the time. This is a serious problem that I wish the bishops would tackle more, because that's going at the very heart and the root of so many of the problems in this country.
But what are the bishops concerned about? They're concerned about all the leftist talking points, right? And as we kind of mentioned, we've said in various other shows and various other platforms that the bishops are basically in bed with the Democrats. And if you want a good primer on this, I just wanted to mention this quickly. If people don't understand how that connection between the U.S. bishops and, you know, the leftist Democrats work, you can go watch a recent Vortex. Michael did a great, like I said, a primer on this. If you don't understand it, it's called Catholic Bishops and Democrats, the Marxist Connection. It's a great way for people to start to get a handle on this.
Yeah, it would be nice if the Bishop Tobin, instead of talking about the, you know, turn in all your guns, he would be addressing fatherhood instead of talking about hunger, you know, patriotism, especially on the 4th of July. And we need to look down on the moral virtue waterfall there. If you start off with justice and giving someone what they're due, and then you get into a subset of justice, giving God what's due, and this is all Thomistic, is religion. Getting into a subset of religion is piety, which is giving to those who are your parents and those who are standing in on God's behalf for you. Then the subset of piety now, so we have justice and religion and piety, we get to patriotism, which really is to your patria, your fatherland. And I believe it was Bishop Sheen that talked about the connection between fatherlessness and the fact that you don't have that patriotism going back up to piety. You certainly wouldn't have piety if, you know, your mom's a drug addict and your father's not even there, and, you know, you have to be told, well, you need to honor your father and mother and give respect and honor service and all this. It's hard. It's a tough lift for kids today. It really is. So when we're at the patriotism, you know, the Marines actually had a slogan, God, Country, Corps, and they actually understood very well that God and then the country, which is also part of your family and the governance and the laws and all of that, and Corps gets right down to your very chain of command and your brotherhood, the band of brothers type of thing that you're in, you know, fighting as a corps. And God, Country, Corps really spelled out the Thomistic approach to all of that very easily, which they understood. And you don't hear any of the virtues being talked about by the bishops. You don't hear any of the root problem, fatherlessness. You don't hear any of that, but just, like you say, a globalist, really. If you want to understand the Democrat talking point, look to the globalists, because then it all of a sudden makes, you really aren't pro-American, are you? You're really not patriotic to our fatherland, are you? George Soros, who wants to put all of his AGs in positions of power, where all the rioting just happened to start, where they just had the, reported on this Church Militant, Soros, AGs, riots, and you're going to see complete overlay of all of that. So the, flooding the country with illegal immigrants, they really aren't trying to, synthesize into the, become part of the country fabric. You're actually breaking laws and living illegally in the country. So all of that, to understand this Marxism and this socialist left and the Democrats and that, you start to look at, well, who's even behind all that? Because in the media doesn't even report on the mass shootings that were stopped by a man with a gun, the home invasions that were stopped successfully with a person with a gun. Media just will not report on that whatsoever. But at the same time, if they find out that, somebody, a black person somehow died at the hands of a white person out there, wall-to-wall coverage. Yeah, well, of course, that's, often they're talking about the police officer situation there. Of course, there's the accusation, of course, famously with George Floyd, who died and kicked off all the riots in 2020. But, of course, when you actually statistically analyze it based on interactions that you have with police officers, black people do not get killed at a disproportionate rate to anyone else. It's just that you end up interacting with police officers more often in a negative fashion, and that is because they're committing more crimes, but not because of race, not because of poverty, not because of anything else. It is entirely because of the the fatherlessness issue. And I think it's also interesting that Gregory brought up this whole thing about racism. So for people who have lived in America, and lived in America their whole lives, obviously there is a great degree of racial tension in the United States of America, and you come here and there's a great degree of racial tension. It has observably got worse within the last 15 or so years. I mean, I first came here in 2006, which of course was before the election of Barack Obama, and in the years since the election of Barack Obama, I will say that I've kind of observed this sense of there's a great degree of racial tension. But even now, the issue of actual systemic, organized racism within the United States, and even just the attitude of people within the United States to people of a different race, skin color, national origin, whatever you want to have. The United States is light years ahead of almost every other country in the world. You go to other places in the world, certainly you go to outside the Anglosphere, you go to places where they don't speak English as a national language, and it's like, my gosh, this is just like institutionalized, shocking racism in there against people who are fundamentally almost identical to you. It's like, obviously, that Michigan and Ohio, we joke a great deal about, great being rivals, but you got to, Greece, Turkey and Greece, they've been at each other's throats for thousands of years. They've been at each other's throats since Troy. You go to Ireland and Northern and Southern Ireland, people who are literally divided along family lines, that they sit there and they hate each other. India and Pakistan, Greece and Cyprus. Greece and Turkey over Cyprus, already mentioned that there. That you go and you look at these
places, and they're just shockingly, horrifically racist. The experience of Korean Japanese in Japan up until very recently, not even allowed to vote because their ancestors were Korean. And this level of just racial hatred elsewhere in the world. The Anglosphere, and particularly the United States, stands as this shining beacon. By any means is it perfect? No, but for Gregory to come along and be sort of raising this up and not calling out other issues and saying, hey, other people need to be following our lead, I think that's disingenuous at best.
Well, yeah, well, again, he just parrots leftist talking points, because, you know, the left is all about promoting this narrative of there's just endemic racism in this country. Everything is racist. Simply being white, you're racist, whether you know it or not. I mean, but going back to this concept of patriotism, I think as Catholics, there is a tension between being fully Catholic, but also fully American. There's some Catholics who take it to an extreme. I call them sort of the extreme traditionalist wing, who think that there's no way to be a traditional Catholic, fully authentically Catholic and American at the same time. But then you have the other extreme who thinks, oh, no, we're completely 100% American. There are certain principles that are a little bit in tension with Catholic teaching. For instance, we don't believe in the absolute freedom of speech to say and express yourself in every single way as Catholics. Obviously, we don't agree that pornography should be protected speech. But I do think there's a way to harmonize Catholic principles with a more authentic reading of the U.S. Constitution. Because when you look at the way the First Amendment is interpreted now to encompass so many behaviors, that didn't really happen until the 20th century, and the way the Supreme Court started liberalizing their interpretation of things. So I blame primarily people sitting on the Supreme Court for doing that. Obviously, we've got a better Supreme Court now. They're trying to roll back some of that, but I think some of the protections protected under the First Amendment today would have horrified the Founding Fathers if they were to look at it now. One
of the greatest rulings just came down was against affirmative action. Supreme Court, Gregory, if he was trying to stamp out racism, should have gave a shout out to the Supreme Court for saying, hey, y'all on the left, you've been racist for years and pushing racism for years. I remember when I was really young, I don't know if I was a teenager or not, but I heard about this affirmative action. I thought, well, gee, you're hiring somebody or getting them into school because they are of certain color. I thought, isn't that racist? But nobody, I was like in an echo chamber, you know, I just couldn't, nobody would sound that back. And I thought, wow, that's really strange that you would just really go out and hire this person. I went to several places of employment, and they said, well, we have to hire so many women and so many blacks and so many Native Americans and so many whoever else, just because there's quotas. And I'm like, wow, that's so you're, you know, hiring people because of their sex and because of their skin color. And the guy who just did that was Biden, right?
With the Supreme Court justice.
I'm going to pick a lady and she has to be black. I mean, what if Trump said, I'm going to pick a man and he's got to be white? And no one said this. You feel like you're just in this outer world body experience floating through this place. Well, like Shirley MacLaine, you know, playing out there. It's like, wow, this is really strange.
Well, there's a couple of things that I would say with regard to that. One was actually a statement, I think, from Morgan Freeman. Of course, Morgan Freeman is a very famous actor and got a very distinctive voice that I won't try to do an impression of. But
he plays God in a movie.
He plays God in a movie. Morgan Freeman just he should narrate everyone's life. I think that's tremendous. But anyway, Morgan Freeman, very good actor, you know. And he was asked about Black History Month. He was asked quite famously about Black History Month, and he said, "It's rubbish. It's garbage." And the interviewer was like, "Oh," and he says, well, when's your History Month? When's White History Month? And this guy said, well, I'm Jewish. And he said, all right, well, when's Jewish History Month? It's like, well, there isn't Jewish History Month. And he says, exactly. You know, that's the thing. You know, my history, you can't reduce my history to a month. And Morgan Freeman said, and I think this was absolutely superb, the way to stop racism is to stop talking about race. And, you know, obviously, this is coming from Morgan Freeman, who is, you know, a man who's very successful. He is in a place of privilege. You know, he absolutely is. But I think there's a great degree of truth there. And on the affirmative action hires, so everyone, we all know about Hannibal Lecter, of course, the famous character in the movies played by Anthony Hopkins. But before, he was in a series of novels written by Thomas Harris. And the first of those novels where he appears, Red Dragon, and there is a character in there who is a blind woman, and she works at a photo processing facility. So it's kind of ironic that she's blind, but she's able to work completely, very well in the dark to do this. Anyway, and she discusses how she was hired because of affirmative action, and she discusses a couple of the other people who were hired at the same time. There was a black person person in a wheelchair, and I think there was a female lesbian who was hired, and she remarks that we were all great affirmative action hires because we counted in 2 categories. So she was a woman, and she was disabled. She was blind. There was the black person in the wheelchair, and so forth. And that they'll throw away line in a very good novel. But yeah, that was the whole thing. You've got this ridiculousness of like, well, corporate America is cooking the books on that one. It's like, oh, let me find the disabled black lesbian, I don't know, whatever, religious minority, whatever. Okay, here we go. I've got 5 out of the diversity hires. There we are, check.
And it's
Let's go home.
so patronizing and so condescending, because you always doubt, did they choose me because I'm actually good at this, or did they choose me just because of all these external factors that they think? And then, as I mentioned on Monday's show, in addition to being just a downright condescending and patronizing, it's also fundamentally unfair. What about, like I mentioned, all these poor kids, poor white kids growing up in the Appalachian Mountains fighting against horrible poverty? Look at J.D. Vance, the life of J.D. Vance, if you watch Hillbilly Elegy, the horrible things he had to go through with a drug-addicted mother and growing up dirt poor and all of these things, and yet he made it to Yale Law School. But you know, with their hiring practices today, I wonder if he ever would have made it because he's white and therefore he's so-called privileged.
Yeah, the identity politics is played in the race baiting that's going on the left all the time. They're always dividing. I think it goes back to the satanic thing, divide and conquer, really. The Diaboline is the one that divides all the time. So you have to be looking at that. You know, the father of lies really on the left, pushing all these divisions. And I think it's a Marxist thing, that the haves and the have-nots, and you just keep dividing and dividing and putting people at odds. It just makes common sense. If you're really trying to take a country over, people over, you would just keep dividing. One of the greatest things, and there was actually talks about that. I wish I had the book right now. About in the 50s, it came out that one of their main plans was this black race baiting to pit blacks against whites. And I can see the cover of the book right now, but I can't say the name of it. But anyway, it's been discussed in many places, that whole notion of as you say, division in a larger sense. But I think, you know, the racial divisions that are being stoked are, you know, very, very, very distressing and very disturbing, because, you know, we fought a war over it. A big one, where a lot of people died, and the scars of that are still on this country. And there's a whole bunch of other things that are related to specifically that one issue of chattel slavery of Africans. That issue of chattel slavery of Africans, it's like, okay, so you've got the use of the gunboats by some of the European powers to stop the slave trade. You have the massive human casualties within the United States during the Civil War to achieve that. You have all of the work being done by people such as Martin Luther King and all of the people who marched with him to overturn this and to make this change. We're not just talking about a question of, well, we're going to have a division between liberals and conservatives, or we're going to have a division between, people of faith and atheists, or people who want to have guns and people who don't. No, we're talking about a racial division where thousands and thousands and thousands of people died over this. And you, all you leftists who are coming around with your divide and conquer policy, you want to turn back the clock. You want to take, within my time of being in the United States, less than 2 decades, you want to take it back from where it started. You've made it worse. And it's like, really, did all that death, did Shenandoah count for nothing? You know? Yeah. Well, Christine, you brought up about Catholic and American, and a lot of people throw out that term Americanism, and they think, well, yeah, the Pope kind of condemned America in that, and he didn't at all. I would like, and most people, I don't think viewers out there realize, I believe today the bishops are the ones, by and large, who are committing the heresy of Americanism. And first of all, to get rid of the straw man, there was a Catholicism article, if you want to go to our site. It's called Evangelization Americanism, and 300 words on the topic. Here is the first particular quote that you need. It says, Leo XIII, 1899, an apostolic letter. He said, Americanism, if by this name is to be understood certain endowments of mind which belong to the American people, and if, moreover, by it is designated your political condition and the laws and the customs by which you're governed, there's no reason to take exception to the name at all. Wow, really? That's Americanism. He's kind of like praising. So what's your problem then? What's Americanism? This is what he said describing Americanism. He warned that the true Catholic unity in worship, doctrine, and government is not obtained by diluting or hiding Christ's teachings. He described this duplicity as follows. Now here we go. This is in order to get converts into the church. This is what's called Americanism. In order to more, this is his quote, straight up, out of Testamentum Benevolentia e Nostrae. In order to more easily attract those who differ from her, the church should, Supich, Tobin, Wilton Gregory, make some concessions, not only in regard to the ways of living, but in regard to doctrines which belong to the deposit of faith. Certain bishops out there were speaking to you who may deny there's a deposit of faith. To omit certain points of her teaching, which are of lesser importance, and to, here's his words, tone down the meaning which the church has always attached to them. Dudes, if you leftist bishops out there don't think this applies to you, this was like prophetic. So he was actually talking about, he was targeting a translation of a U.S.-born father, Thomas Hecker, from the Paulist Fathers. And he, I got one more point on there. He says, he even doubted that this was going on at the time in the United States, this watering down of the doctrine. He said if it did, he says, quote, there can be no manner of doubt that the bishops of America would be the first to repudiate and condemn it. He's like, well, you know, if it happens. And Gibbons actually said, no, there's nothing going on right now. So it is today going on. That's their pastoral approach to everything. Water it all down, dilute it and all this. And that's what the focus of the problem of the apostolic letter called Americanism addressed. And if we don't have that problem in America today, I mean, bishops, that is you right there.
I think you make a great point. Just going on, you know, Pope Leo XIII and what he said in that. No, I think a lot of the bishops are guilty of the heresy of Americanism. That's exactly what they're doing. There are some Catholics, though, who are taking Pope Leo XIII's words too far, and they use his this encyclical to condemn the entire concept of America. But I want to read from what the words of Pope Leo XIII himself to show that he does not at all. In fact, this is what he says. Nor perchance did the fact which we now recall, he's talking about the founding of America, okay? He said, which we now recall take place without some design of divine providence, precisely at the epoch when the American colonies, having, with Catholic aid, meaning the French, achieved liberty and independence, coalesced into a constitutional republic. The ecclesiastical hierarchy was happily established amongst you. And at the very time when the popular suffrage placed the great Washington at the helm of the republic, the first bishop was set by apostolic authority over the American church. The well-known friendship and familiar intercourse which subsisted between these two men, Washington and then the first Archbishop of Baltimore, seems to be an evidence that the U.S. ought to be conjoined in concord and amity with the Catholic Church, and that's how it should be. It's not become that, unfortunately. Primary, you know, Biden, a Catholic, so-called Catholic, who's the most hostile against the Catholic Church. But yeah,
it's interesting, you see, because there's a great quote from Winston Churchill, of course. Winston Churchill is most famous for leading the British Empire during World War II. But Winston Churchill arguably is like, there's a significant quantity of Winston Churchill that is American. You can sit there and debate how much it is, but he had great connections to the United States. And he said something, I'm probably paraphrasing a little. He said, you know, you can count on Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. But which I think is absolutely, I've lived here for 17 years, and I think it's absolutely perfectly true. But there is, I think, something that I've said about America is that the American Constitution, the American system of government is objectively, it is very imperfect. But it is the best one that we have hitherto come up with. There are no alternatives that actually take into account the nature of man in the same way as the American constitutional system. In terms of generosity and charity and assistance to other nations and providing something positive on the world stage, yes, the Americans' contribution, the contribution of America, is deeply and grotesquely flawed. It is still better than any other empire that has ever existed. And I think at that point, it's like you are making the perfect the enemy of the good. If you come along and say, well, America, it's founded by Masons, and it's got these elements within the Constitution and its principles that are not 100% in accord with Catholic teaching, I would be like, I 100% agree. what are your options? You know, if you want to be able to snap your fingers and make the perfect Catholic republic or the perfect Catholic kingdom or the perfect Catholic empire, I'm all ears. Unfortunately, we don't live in some magical world.
Yeah,
we live in the real world where this is reality. And you know what? The American experiment has proven to be the best results so far. If you got something better, I'm willing to hear it. I've moved out of one country, I'll do it again.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I want to address also some misconceptions by well-intentioned but extremely zealous traditionalist Catholics who kind of make that argument and essentially say that being a Catholic is not, you know, America is terrible. We need to restore the monarchy, that the church has always condemned democracy, that democracy is simply not allowed by the popes, and they'll quote certain popes. And I'm just like, this is absolutely not true at all. You can actually read your great idol, Pope St. Pius X, and he specifically addresses democracy. Now, he doesn't say it's the best and highest form of government, but he said it is perfectly acceptable. It's a perfectly acceptable form of government. So I'm just tired of like these people quoting me saying democracy is horrible, it's condemned, it's a hellish, you know, sinful, you know, we can't do this. That's not true.
I'd like to float out there. I don't know if it's been really floated too much in the public out there or not, but the downfall of even Catholic republics. You have the Philippines, Malta, Ireland. Those have all fallen by the wayside too, and they were Catholic republics. We didn't come across as a Catholic republic, but we actually made a pretty good run of it. In this country, the bishops were teaching the Catholic faith, putting that out into the system, and all the founding fathers into the stream, moral stream, and all the founding fathers of the country said, this is Ben Franklin. Do you have a republic or a monarchy? Well, a republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. Meaning, and they all said if biblical Christianity and the morality, you start enshrining, because hey son, that gun actually is loaded and it shoots and it makes real laws, and if you start enshrining laws that are immoral, it's just going to tear the fabric of this country. But you know what? We gave you a system to make laws, and it's up to you to make moral laws. That's why you know, elect moral officials. The whole Bill Clinton thing, you know, character doesn't matter. My goodness, if character didn't matter, then morality and principles and any of that doesn't matter, because that's what you're made of, is your character, right? So that part of it, now trying to go, okay, well, what did we learn from the past? Catholic Ireland, Malta, Philippines, you stopped teaching the Catholic faith. What did we do in this country? We stopped teaching the Catholic faith. We started doing this Americanism, watering everything down. Hey, if we just play nice, you know, and kind of let down all the fences, the sheep will kind of wander in, right? The post-Vatican II era pastoral approach. And that doesn't work. It never has worked. This whole idea that, you know, I raise my kids, you know, and I let them choose the religion they want. Some, you know, they're 14 now and they can decide for themselves what they want to do. Really?
14-year-olds are idiots.
Okay, well, even 12, you know, I'm just going to let my kids decide someday. Do you let them do that with math? You decide what 2 + 2 is, son. You're free, white, and 21. You decide that. When do you start deciding what's true and not true? If you really believe Jesus was, you know, incarnate and God and Trinity is real, and then you teach that. And if someone wants to walk away and reject that, that's up to them. But you give them the truth, and there is supernatural truth and natural truth, and you know what? Truth is truth. So you present that. This whole idea that there's no such thing as a positive faith, and we don't. You're doing the same thing that parents who really don't believe there is, you know, in God and all that are doing with their kids. They're not really informing their kids in truth and knowledge. The same thing with the bishops today. You know, I don't want to bring. I don't want my, you know, to. How did that? Was that? Anyways, a bishop in, who was a Boston back in the day? About the 50s, 1950s. It was, he's like, I don't want to force my religion on others. About 1964. Oh, if I could see his name, I can see him standing there. Anyway, 1964, and he says, I don't want to push my religion on other people. This is the whole time.
That's literally your job.
I know. You work for a Jewish carpenter, right? And if you don't want to take the, you know, do the job, don't take the pay. Go home. Don't take the mitre off. Let somebody else do it who believes in the Catholic faith and who cares that they want to get into heaven. So that's the problem. It's always been the problem. The bishops have to be teaching the faith, because you have to have, whether it's a monarchy, King Henry VIII.
I was going to talk about him.
He has to have that faith in lived, loved, and, you know, you believe it, you know it, you love it, and you live it. If you don't do that, you're going to be a bad king. You're going to let go of the monarchy. It's going to be a bad monarchy. if you don't, if in the republics, if you don't, and democracy is really only part of a republic, but we have kind of a limited democracy here, and we just throw it all as a democracy. But a republic is actually kind of made, you know, put handcuffs on the government so they can only go so far. That's what a republic does. And this idea that you just have an unlimited democracy, that two wolves and a sheep can sit down and vote for what
well, yeah,
they want.
down to that.
We don't have this crazy idea of just democracy. We have a Catholic Republic. Catholic Republic should be there. And how do you fix it to make the laws moral? And I would say have a Catholic moral Supreme Court. We can kick stuff up to the CDF.
Well, yeah,
have a kissing archbishop who's going to be head of the CDF.
Smoochy Fernandez.
I mean, you know.
So maybe that wouldn't even work.
As we said, you know, elections have consequences. People voted for Trump. Trump placed 3 good Supreme Court justices on there. I mean, I think it's absolutely amazing that on the U.S. Supreme Court, where they have lifetime tenure, okay, so they're on there for decades, and it's taken decades to slowly shape the U.S. Supreme Court to the way it is now, where you not only have a conservative majority, you have a Catholic majority, and not just regular Catholics. I mean, a lot of these are actually devout practicing Catholics. So I find that miraculous.
Oh, indeed,
in and of itself.
I think it is. I think, you know, as well, look, you brought up Henry VIII. You know, let's go through, again, to talk about your subject, Christina, for people saying, oh, the monarchy, the monarchy, the monarchy. Let's go through and actually look at it. Henry VIII, okay, wrote in defense of the 7 Sacraments against Martin Luther. It still stands as one of the finest pieces of apologetics ever written.
Defender of the faith.
Defender of the faith. That's why he was given that title by the Pope himself. He was a staunch defender of the Catholic faith against Protestantism, and then he has his own personal weakness and venality, which ends up with him schisming from the church in that sense. You look at the collapse of the Catholic monarchy in France. You look at the collapse of the Catholic monarchy in France. Obviously, the revolutionaries, bloodthirsty, awful people, but why did that happen? Why did that collapse happen? Because Louis wasn't exactly a good king. You know, the Tsar in Russia, not Catholic, Orthodox, but the Tsar in Russia, overthrown, you know, by the Russian people. Why do you get the little red claws in the Tsar and his family? How does that happen? Because they're not exactly living a perfect life. This is the inevitable consequence of when you come along and say, oh, here's a monarch. Great. It works for a while. And then what do you do when you transition from Edward I to Edward II? What then? What do you do then?
Yeah. I don't have a problem with monarchy, but the idealizing of it is a problem. Because monarchy is obviously, it's the institution that's been used more than any other over the vast majority of humankind. St. Thomas Aquinas has spoken about it, about the highest and best form of government and the lowest and worst. And he actually said, monarchy is the best as long as you have a good king, you know, who helps promote morality. But tyranny is the worst because now you have a king who's now promoting immorality. So there's a flip side to it.
It's always, with monarchy, it's always high risk, high reward. You get a good one in there, he's doing great things, everyone's happy. You get a bad monarch in there, it's really hard to change the levers of power as a peasant running around. But it reminds me of something that he's a Scottish 1700s historian Alexander Teitler said about not monarchy but about democracy, which, as we mentioned, is a very acceptable form of government, as is monarchy, as there's a few other ones that the church says are all acceptable forms of government. He says this about democracy, and Brad brings up the point too of having, you know, and even the founding fathers talked about this, how our republic, our democracy is meant for a virtuous people.
Yes.
If we don't have a virtuous people, it's not going to work. That's kind of what we're seeing playing out right now in secular society. But Teitler pointed this out way back when, in the 1700s. He said that there's this sort of thing that happens in democracy. He calls it his famous cycle of democracy, where you have, you know, some sort of bondage. You know, American Revolution, we had that, unjust taxation and whatnot, and we had a rebellion, right? And I think rightfully so. And then you had, you know, people of faith did that, the virtuous people did that, and then it starts to go to an abundance. And then people start to get complacent, and then they fall back into that bondage once again because they submit themselves to a tyrannical authority. And I think that's what we're seeing now with the American citizens, you know, who vote for people on the left. That's what they're doing. They're bowing to this tyrannical authority. majority. And you end up back in bondage, and then it takes, you know, faith to come back in and people to start a new revolution, a secession maybe. I don't know.
Another cycle that actually mirrors that, or is just another way of saying that, I guess. Hard times make good men. So we had the Great Depression, the greatest generation. We had the World War I, Great Depression, World War II. These are very great men that came out of that era. And the great men, so you got hard times make great men make good times. So you had the roaring 50s and the boom of the 60s and on. Then you have the good times make weak men. And then weak men make bad times. And that's where we're at right now. They're not building churches, they're tearing them down. They're not building plants, they're tearing them down. Everything that was built is being eroded, tore down, sold off, given away, whatever, and not being built anymore. We're decaying. And that's the hard times that we are going through. And also that you have, you know, if you have a virtuous society, how do you get a virtuous society? It only comes from the Catholic Church and the bishops. You're only putting morality, truth and grace. That's what you get from the Catholic Church, truth and grace. If you're not putting truth and grace out there in front of the people, then you have this moral entropy, right? This just comes apart.
And obviously viewers out there are probably watching the show at this point. They're thinking, okay, we agree with you 100%. America's going to hell in a handbasket. Bishops are horrible. What's the solution? What do we do? Absolutely, this constitutional republic does not work without a moral people to guide it. That's up to you. That's up to me, to each one of us. You have to be that moral person. Don't look to the bishops to do it, because we already see a lot of them are not doing it. Don't just sit around waiting for the bishops to do stuff. Don't sit around waiting for your priest to do it. Don't kvetch online all day long like a keyboard warrior, because that doesn't do anything either. Fine, recognize the problem, but then you go and spread the faith to the people that you can in your orbit. And if you're in a position to do so, support your local elected, you know, whatever officials who are moral and implementing moral laws. Maybe donate to their campaign, and if you can, maybe run yourself. Maybe run for school board or something local if you can do it. If you can, obviously, first thing is pray. Are you praying the rosary every day? You know, I mean, if you're not, there's a huge problem. You're not doing the spiritual protection that this country needs or your family needs, so do that first. But can you do something to help elect leaders who can go out there and fight to implement morality in our culture?
Yeah, and as well, there's this very interesting thing with this. So obviously you brought up at the beginning of the show, Christine, the whole issue of the First Amendment and specifically the freedom of speech. And it's like there are certain kinds of speech that the Catholic Church, Catholics do not believe should be permitted. For example, use the example of pornography. And certainly we all agree with that. But the problem is not that pornography is permitted. The problem is that pornography is used. That is the issue. The solution to rampant alcoholism and people going blind and people neglecting their families, etc., that the Americans put in was prohibition. And it's like, we're going to ban the production of alcohol. Well, okay, what happened? Everyone just made alcohol in their bathtubs, and you know, this is where Chicago kicks off as a violent city. That's it. You can lay it right at the feet there. You know, people like Al Capone and the O'Banions and so forth were kicking it off there with Tommy guns, etc. So the situation is not improved because you've still got people who want to go out there and get drunk, and the amount of alcohol drunk, the number of people dying of alcohol actually increased. What you need is not some, we're going to ban alcohol. You need essentially a movement for sobriety and temperance. Yes, absolutely. Would it be better if pornography was banned and that the First Amendment was carefully curtailed? Yes. But then again, that is a dangerous path to take, because at what point do you start curtailing other language? It is better to say, look, you have the freedom to say whatever you like. You can say all of these things. And you go, whoa, okay, that's pretty cool. Whoa, I don't want to say that. Then don't say it. Then don't say it, and when somebody says it, don't listen to it, don't pay for it, don't buy it, don't endorse it, don't do it. The market, you know, arguably the American Revolution is a capitalist revolution, is a promotion of free capitalism. Capitalism has an answer to these problems. It's like, okay, there's this horrible, awful thing out there, don't support it, don't do it, don't engage with it yourself, and it will die on the vine. You know, that's one of these things. The laws banning abortion, for example, absolutely 100% wonderful things. Everybody should be voting for them. Everybody should be working towards them. But ultimately, it wouldn't matter if abortion was legal on the books if nobody wanted to do it. If there was a moral people out there, it wouldn't cause a problem. That's the thing.
Yeah, I think that we talked about fatherlessness is the problem. Family really is the solution. And you go back to Fatima, when Sister Lucia said that, you know, Satan's final battle will be against the family. My gosh, if you don't see that today in 1,001 different ways, and still just raging and gaining in force. Viewers out there, you need to know that your families are actually the solution. From those families, we talk about, you know, soft men, weak men make hard times, but those hard times are making strong men, strong generations, strong families, and it's that family from which you, instead of getting bad Catholics like Biden, maybe bad Catholics like King Henry VIII, you're going to get good Catholics again. And also, those Catholics are going to be leaders in the church and state. They're going to be, you know, senators and presidents and all that, but they're also going to be bishops and priests, cardinals, and all this. So you're going to have strong leadership again. But those vocations and those men that are going to go on, and women, and whatever service capacity to the church and state, are being formed in those families. Those are your future leaders in church and state. You have to know that family, that's what Satan is after. If he's after two things in the world, it's the Catholic Church, the source of truth and grace, and families that are trying to live, consume, put into practice that truth and grace on a regular daily basis. Those are his two arch enemies. And you as the people out there really need to protect your family, sacramentals, prayer on a daily basis, family rosary, you know, watch all of the ways in which Satan comes into the house through all the media, all the radio, the music, the online streaming, computers, phones, and all this stuff. You got to know what's going on, all the weaknesses that are coming in, because your kids aren't able to stand up to all that. Trying to raise your kids morally, like you say, you know, yeah, okay, all this porn's on my phone if I went there. But I need to raise my kids to know that this is not where you want to go. This is not what you want to do. So it starts young and all that. So the problem, a lot of parents don't, you know, I think it's late in the game, but you got to do what you can.
That is the solution to turn this country around. It's going to take a long time, obviously, because you're raising your children, but we were talking about fatherlessness. Okay, be good fathers. Be a good father to your children. Be there for your children. Get off your TV, get off your screens, put away your golf clubs for a moment and spend time with your children. Raise your children. Take that, be there with them. Mothers, if you be the most devout mother that you can possibly be. Stay in the state of grace. If you are a single mother through no fault of your own, maybe your husband died or your husband's not, stepping up and doing stuff, you just be the best mother that you can possibly be. But that is the solution, is we've got to start now with our individual families, because a sick society is the result of many, many millions of sick families.
Yeah, and I think, something very interesting you said there, Christine. You said if you're a single mother through no fault of your own. I would say if you're a single mother, and it is your fault.
Yes.
Or if you are an absent father, and that is your fault. If you are somebody who's, done some terrible things, and it is your fault, that doesn't get you off the hook. You don't get to go, hey, you know what, I'm decades after this era, and the damage has been done. My children are already away from the faith, and they're staying away from the faith, and their children, my grandchildren, they're away from the faith. They've never darkened the door of a Catholic church. They don't want to talk to me because they hate me for what I did. It doesn't get you off the hook. It's not going to go, oh, well, guess what? I messed up. Fine, yes, you messed up. That is the first step in this. The second step is like, how can I mend what I marred? And you can do something. And I think that's kind of a key point, that we're not just saying, like, hey, the people out there who've suffered at the hands of this horrible world. It's like, hey, were you part of the reason this world is horrible? Well, okay, we all are. We're all human. We all did this. And we all need to go, okay, we all messed up. We all made a mistake. We all bear responsibility for this awfulness. We need to fix it.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of The Download. Now, please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation, our church, and our families. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Ave Maria.
Salve Regina, gratia misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. Ad te clamamus exules filii Eve. Ad te suspiramus gementes efflentes, in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordes oculos ad nos converte. Et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende. O clemens, O pia, O dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen.
Father, and Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you again for joining us for the download. We premiere a new episode like this every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. From all of us here at Church Militant, God bless you.